our dear viewers, and welcome to a new edition of our program Africa Today. Indeed, a very important round of the COP27 that took place in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. And in this episode, we'll be shedding light on its goals and how it made a historic and unprecedented achievement by establishing a loss and damage fund, whose specific task a transitional committee will implement during the coming weeks. When the UN climate change high-level champion for Egypt and UN Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, Muhammed, said that COP27 made a historic and unprecedented achievement by establishing the Loss and Damage Fund, whose specific task a transitional committee will implement during the coming period. Around 200 countries at the 27 UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, which concluded on Sunday in the Red Sea Sharm el-Sheikh resort, compensate vulnerable nations for the loss and damage from the climate-fueled disasters. To shed more light, we are having a look at the following story.
COP27 President and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry said that setting up a loss and damage fund to help vulnerable nations cope with climate-induced disasters is a historic achievement, fulfilling 27 years of negotiations. Shoukry said in a press conference only hours after the hard-fought deal was reached that this is a historic achievement following 27 years of discussing the issue as well as the demands from African and developing nations. Around 200 countries at the 27th UN Climate Change Conference in the Egyptian Red Sea city of Sharm el-Sheikh reached an agreement to establish a funding mechanism to compensate vulnerable nations for loss and damage from climate-fueled disasters. Shoukry said that the deal was the embodiment of the conference slogan, "Together for Implementation." The issue of loss and damage had dominated the negotiations, causing them to miss the Friday deadline and stretch into early Sunday morning. Shoukry said the Egyptian presidency facilitated the participation of all parties in meetings over the past 48 hours. Shoukry noted that the goal was to reach a convergence point that fulfilled the minimum demands of the delegations. Shoukry explained that the conference presidency helped facilitate the successful outcome by circulating proposals that were hashed out informally to reach a consensus. He also highlighted the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda that Egypt introduced during the two-week summit, saying it represents another action plan to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the closing session of COP27, Shoukry underscored the importance of taking into consideration all recommendations and decisions reached during the climate conference. He said the COP27 decisions are a gateway to reaching climate neutrality and resilience, calling for these decisions to be regarded not just as words on paper, but as messages addressed to future generations in order to implement the Paris Agreement.
And to shed more light on the issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Dr. Muhammed Amer, coordinator of the International Relations and Conferences and COP27 Organizing Committee member. Dr. Amer, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk today.
Thank you so much for being our guest, Dr. Amer. COP27 President and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry said that settling up a loss and damage fund to help the vulnerable nations cope with the climate, including disaster, is actually a historic achievement, fulfilling 27 years of negotiations. What's your take on that and the importance of agreeing about establishing this very important fund?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a very important question, and there is no doubt that the Loss and Damage Fund is the utmost important finding of COP27 and in a historic decision after 30 years of the inaction. Parties at COP27 finally established that fund is the first step towards redress and accountability for human rights harm caused to millions confronting climate impacts on the front line. Doing so, I believe that much work remains to be done in terms of operating the loss and damage fund itself and implementing the fund itself to the ground to ensure that the fund is not just an empty shell, but it's very fitful for purpose, sufficiently resourced, and it goes in line with the human rights, climate justice, and the needs of every single community, and even indigenous people. This particular fund is being implemented on ground to make sure that it goes for those the most vulnerable communities all over the world, not only in the developed countries.
Indeed. Actually, around 200 countries at the 27th UN Climate Change Conference reached an agreement to establish the funding mechanism to compensate the vulnerable nations for the losses and damage from the climate-fueled disasters. Would you tell us more about this very important deal that they did succeed to reach?
I think it's very, very linked and connected to the loss and damage fund. The world has decided to establish a new funding arrangements for assisting developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to adverse effects of climate change. These arrangements are responding to loss and damage, including a focus on addressing the loss and damage by providing and assisting and mobilizing new and additional resources. That these new arrangements complement and include sources, funds, processes, and even initiatives under the outside convention of the Paris Agreement. This mechanism will be put into ground in a practical way that after the negotiations are successful, I think it's due time to implement them on the ground.
Sir, also during the COP27, Egypt succeeded in focusing the attention on adaptation measures by linking them to the essentials of the daily life, including the food security and the water management. How do you see that?
Yeah, totally. I believe while we have been in the COP27, Egypt launched 3 initiatives on adaptation, agriculture, and even food security meant to serve people, climate action, and nature. The most important one is the initiative announced, which is called FAST. FAST means Food and Agriculture for Sustainable Transformation, which focuses on increasing climate finance contributions for agriculture and food systems to support the most vulnerable communities. It's meant to implement the tangible measures to improve climate action and increase financing to sustainable transformation for food and agriculture systems by the year of 2030, which goes in line with the Egyptian agenda of 2030. Noting that the initiative itself was launched by the Egyptian presidency of COP27 and cooperation with the FAO and the number of NGOs. And I believe it's one of the most important initiatives that was launched together by the Egyptian presidency and by the United Nations itself.
Actually, sir, the experts have always raised concern about how the climate change affects the food security. What kind of global action here must be taken to limit the effect of the climate change, and to what extent we are going to witness here unification of interest and united stance from the different nations who participated in the COP in order to face these challenges?
Yeah, of
on
course.
The ground.
And yeah, exactly. Actually, it's safe and sound to say that as long as the developing and the less developed countries in both Africa and Asia and different regions all over the globe are the most deserving finance on food security and water security, it's a natural thing to be in the middle of the focus itself, not only in this COP, but in the future COPs as well. Climate change has always been the first reason behind the deterioration of natural resources of such maybe poor countries, developing and less developed countries, despite their minimum or limited contribution to the worldwide gas and carbon emissions. And here we go, we have seen droughts, desertification, and even deterioration of agricultural lands due to such imminent change. Which is threatened, by the way, their food security in the first place. And yes, I believe this COP particularly focused on maybe compensating those particular countries in the continents from such imminent impact from the climate change.
Yeah, indeed. Sir, discussing how best actually to face the worsening climate conditions, the attendees did highlight the importance of the public-private partnerships, sustainable financing, and increase the community engagement. What's your take on that, Dr. Amer?
Yeah, I think this is very important. I think it's time to stop thinking of the public-private partnerships as a tool for public procurement and start thinking of them as a tool of development.
Yeah.
This is not a tool for that simply integrates the value for money, which it should, by the way, but it's a tool that itself integrated in the Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 17. With this mindset, with this new mindset, we can also contemplate smaller scale PPPs or the public-private partnerships at the local level. We need much more than the occasional partnership project driven by a central authority. Following the example of the World Bank, the World Bank Group Scaling Solar, that is an initiative given by the World Bank, it delivers thousands of projects at once. I think if we applied such an initiative locally here in Egypt, and if we exported that initiative to the African continent and after that to the whole world, I think it's again very, very beneficial for us and for all over the world.
Yes, indeed. Actually, also the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Dr. Hilal Saeed, launched the Friends of Greening National Investment Plans for Africa and the Developing Countries initiative that capitalizes on the success stories of the partners in tackling the impact of the climate change. Can you tell us more about this very important initiative as well?
Yeah, it's one of the most important initiatives given out there. The initiative itself will help shape the economic policies that contribute to mitigation and adaptation efforts. It will propose a set of, you can say, guidelines for expediting the implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contributions. It goes in line with the need to work collaboratively towards finding solutions to tackle climate change in light of the fact that developing countries, especially here in Africa, are the most vulnerable to these impacts. And yes, it's a very, and you can see the name of the initiative itself, Friends of Greening National Investment Plans. So it's done in a friendly way, but focusing on the African continent and developing countries.
Yeah. Also, Egypt launched the Decent Life for a Climate Resilient Africa initiative, which aims to integrate the climate action into sustainable rural development in the African continent. Can you shed more light about this initiative as well?
Yeah, I'm really proud of this because this particular initiative will involve the implementation of a group of projects and programs to endorse African resilience, diverse livelihoods, and enhance the rural economy by encouraging private sector investment within countries and within small rural areas. The initiative also is based on the cooperation between African countries, various partners, and stakeholders to improve the living conditions of 30% of the neediest rural villages all over the African continent. So by 2030, I believe this initiative, which is also an extension of our Decent Life initiative, will achieve its own objectives. So as long as it changes the lives of around 6 million people here in Egypt, it will change millions of African people all over the continent.
Yeah. Also, the universality of the climate change has prompted Egypt to implement a sustainable development model which is centered on increasing the green products to 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2030. Would you please elaborate on Egypt's plans to achieve these goals?
Yeah, of course. And stemming from the Egypt's vision of 2030, you can see different new cities and new towns that are built, and even the old ones, they are turned into green ones. You can see Sharm el-Sheikh, you can see Hurghada, and maybe you are moving towards Galala and the new cities. These are green cities. We can call them green cities because of the green policies that are implemented out there. We are getting rid of some gas emissions, carbon emissions. by turning these cities into green ones. So, as we witnessed in Sharm el-Sheikh and different places, I believe, and stemming from our vision, we are turning into a green country, which is a very important goal that we go for in the future. So, using this model and which goes in line with the United Nations SDGs, I believe we are going in line with the SDGs themselves and also with our vision here locally in Egypt. And we're also exporting these policies around our region and our region, in the Middle East and in the African continent itself.
Yeah.
So I believe we are in the middle of a very important journey here. If we are applying SDGs internally and even externally, you are doing very good with your agenda, with your plans, and with your vision. We totally would do this.
Indeed. Dr. Muhammed Amer, Coordinator of International Relations and Conferences and COP27 Organizing Committee member, thank you so much for being our guest for today and for your precious input. And moving on, the 18th Francophonie Summit hosted November 19th till November 20th in Jeddah, under the theme Connectivity in Diversity, the Digital Vector of Development and Solidarity in the French-Speaking World, marking the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the International Organization of the Francophonie, OIF, was crowned by the adoption of the Jeddah Declaration. The participating 31 heads of state and government and 35 foreign affairs ministers notably discussed the adoption of the 2022 till 2026 Digital Francophonie strategy. More details.
The world's French-speaking countries gathered in Tunisia on Saturday for talks focused on economic cooperation but faced calls to do more to resolve international crises. The head of the International Organization of La Francophonie, IOF, urged the organization to use its clout in a world fractured by multiple crises. A former Rwandan chief diplomat said the IOF must remain a link that can be used to prevent tensions from degenerating into conflicts. Around 30 heads of state and government, including French and Senegalese presidents Emmanuel Macron and Macky Sall, along with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, attended the summit on the Tunisian resort island of Djerba. The event is a diplomatic boon for President Kais Saied, whose government has faced international criticism since a sweeping power grab last year. While the two-day meeting and associated economic forum will officially focus on technology and development, it is also an opportunity for Western and African leaders to discuss issues like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many African countries have decried what they see as a lack of international solidarity in the face of crises on their continent, in sharp contrast with the European government's swift support for Kyiv. Earlier, Macron said the IOF should reclaim its diplomatic role, noting that in North Africa the use of French has declined over the past decades. But he added that French remains the universal language of the African continent. Macron, who also attended the G20 summit in Bali and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting earlier this week, is not due to address the summit.
And our dear viewers, we wrap up this episode of Africa Today with this feature story. What would you usually do with your old newspaper, carrier bags and Capri Sun juice packets? For most people, the answer is just throw it in the bin, but not on the Nigerian conservation group, which worked with the young activists and the models in order to transform the rubbish into traction. The show aimed to encourage the recycling and to promote the sustainable fashion.
Rocking the runway with trash and recycled materials on, young models took part in the 2022 edition of the annual Fashion Show in Lagos, Nigeria. The event celebrates creative fashion design and promotes waste reduction and sustainability. Since its inception in 2012, models graced the runway wearing outfits made from items we would normally throw in the garbage. Green Fingers Wildlife Initiative, a non-profit conservation group funded by donations, works with young people as an advocate for a better environment. The environmental activists have been partnering with teenagers in their drive for a better, cleaner environment. It organizes regular trash cleanups across communities at drainage ditches and beaches. The plastic litter is then used to create fabrics for the fashion show. Despite several efforts by succeeding governments and commercial organizations in that regard, managing garbage disposal remains a problem in Lagos. Authorities said that with an estimated population of 25 million generates at least 12,000 metric tons of waste daily. In collaboration with young activists and models, the Green Fingers Wildlife Initiative said it's out to recycle as many plastics as possible, one community at a time. Upcycling some of it could be a solution to managing garbage disposal, according to designer for this year's fashion show. Together with her team, she designed and created dress pieces out of the mounting plastic pollution they find on the streets, beaches, and waterways of Nigeria's booming cultural megacity. A model believes her involvement in the show is about making a difference. On November 20, one day following the show, the United Nations COP27 Climate Summit backed the creation of a fund to cover the damages suffered by nations worst affected by the climate crisis. In Nigeria, more and more young people are joining the push for change as the effects of climate crises worsen with each passing year.
Well, with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today. And our dear viewers, till next week with another crew, it's goodbye. Many thanks for watching.